Hi everyone, my name is Vandita and my pronouns are she and her. I'm the founder and CEO of One Future Collective, an organization based in India. I think for me, what's really special about how I got here is that when I was 6 years old, I think I stood up in a classroom and I told my teacher that I'm going to be a human rights lawyer. And when I was 21, I was a human rights lawyer. But along that pathway, the idea of justice for me radically transformed. And that has really informed what feminism means to me as well. I started with the idea of justice as very adversarial, as something that you win against someone else. And that's what drew me to law as well. To me, it seemed to be a pathway towards achieving social justice. Through my work as a lawyer and otherwise, I focused on social justice education and on supporting survivors of sexual and gender based violence. Every case I took up, every person I was able to provide any support to, I realized just how broken my idea of justice was and how important it was for justice to mean about healing and repair, not just for the survivor, but for communities and societies at large, of course, while centering the survivor. And I think having this transformation through my journey, of course, this happened through working with different organizations, volunteering in different places, and being given the honor and opportunity to work with survivors and other vulnerable communities. I think it really transformed what justice means for me, and that informed what One Future Collective came to be. It came to be an organization that looked at justice as a liberatory practice, that looked at justice as a pathway for healing, and also that wanted to imagine a world that could be centered around communities of care. And now the work I do is very focused on social justice education, consciousness raising, and really interrogating and providing alternative and transformative justice pathways for anyone that's gone through harm, abuse, or violence. When I was 18, with a couple of friends, I started something called Students for Social Reform Initiative. And we did a lot of after school programs in different communities. In one such program, I remember I went back to a community that I worked with after about a month of exams. And a really small, like 6-year-old girl walks up to me and tells me she has a new mother. And in that moment, it didn't register for me what that meant. And when I asked her what it meant, she told me that she lost her mother because her mother faced domestic violence while pregnant with her now younger brother. A big government hospital is 500 meters from where they live. But nobody even took the mother to the hospital because they were only concerned about what it would mean for the community, for the family, for the mother to be registered in the hospital and to register this as a police complaint. I think for me, that was one of the first moments in my life when I really interrogated if my idea of justice was really justice. And it was a turning point for me in terms of how I was leading and listening as well. Because I feel in the beginning of my work, I came with a certain idea of this is what justice means because of my own lived experiences and my identities. And then over time, I realized that my lived experience cannot be a dominant narrative, but it has to be one of the many voices that comes together to create a solution or to create some next steps towards a problem. I think that was one really important turning point for me. I think second, more recent, was in the pandemic. I have had friends call me up at 2 a.m., friends who are also social workers, breaking down because of the sort of harm and violence they're seeing. And harm and violence, not just in terms of like physical violence, but losing someone because you couldn't arrange for an oxygen bed for them, losing someone because you couldn't get a taxi to transport them to the hospital. And these were friends of mine who were volunteering to do this for strangers. And I think that was a really deep moment of realization for me as to one, how broken the system is, and how sometimes to be able to fix it, we're going to have to repair right from the roots, and it can't just be patchwork fixes. And something else that really stayed with me was throughout the civil society response to COVID 19, especially in India, we looked at social workers as heroes and as warriors, but nobody cared about them. Nobody cared about the fact that they were risking their lives to distribute ration, that they had families back home, that they could be immunocompromised, that there was no social protection for them if they lost jobs. Most of us don't have pensions, most of us don't have other schemes. I think from this, what changed as I would say a turning point for me was to say that I don't just want to say I'm practicing feminist leadership, but I want to not only advocate for it within my own organization, but I want to advocate for it within the sector. And I want to bring in different movements, because this is not something that can happen in silos, to be able to build one organization, the one I lead, as an example of this change, but to also transform the sector. What does it mean to include disability justice, labor rights, and a lot of myriad other intersectional issues, and bring them in solidarity to transform an institution? Another learning from me here definitely was not just listening to my team, but to figuring out a way or a system where my team could lead, and they could lead from their positionality, they could lead from where they were at, and how they could be enabled and set up for success. And I think that really shifted for me in the pandemic as well, because I noticed a new way of working and being that could just be us coming together to do something together because we cared, without needing external force or pressures to do that work. So I think these were really defining moments for me in what changed my value system, and then what transformed how I led. And it also expanded my capacity and ambition in terms of leadership, to say that this isn't just something I can implement in my team or my organization, but that as a feminist leader, it is also my responsibility to advocate for it in spaces that I have access to, and to advocate for it in spaces that it's uncomfortable for me to do it in. I think over time, feminist leadership to me has become about practice and not position. And it has become a way to implement the values that I hold, and to tie those values into concrete infrastructure and policy that I can build around them, to not only hold myself accountable, but to create a system that is value led, value based, and also value accountable. And I think that's the transformation that's happened for me with feminist leadership. When I think about what feminist leadership looks like for me, I can give you a couple of examples. I think I also have a really strong belief that for me, any practice or principle that I'm not able to internalize is not something that I'm able to practice, or I don't think I'm doing full justice to. And for me, the most difficult frontier tends to be home and my personal life. So when I started with feminist leadership, I feel like it was so much easier for me to practice it at work, or to just try doing it in workplace settings. But I think to step back and to do it on the home front was a challenge. And a big part of that has been my relationship with my parents, with my sibling, with my friends. But one such example for me has been, I think, in my relationship with my parents, feminist leadership has allowed me to understand that accountability does not mean removing someone from community. Accountability does not mean that that person is no longer my problem. Accountability, in fact, means that it is my responsibility, especially as someone in a leadership role, to bring that person in, to sit down and have that difficult conversation, and really reimagine what repair looks like, and to be able to fix that relationship and to grow something more beautiful out of it. And I've seen that happen a lot on the home front once I started practicing feminist leadership more actively. I think the second thing that's really happened for me is with friendships. I'm someone who depends a lot on her community and friends for support. And feminist leadership has allowed me to expand my idea of community. It has allowed me to expand my idea of friendship. And it's allowed me to build relationships with people that are not transactional, but that are rooted in reciprocity, mutual love, and also relationships that give independence and freedom, rather than relationships that create more boundaries and restrictions around people, be it with my partner or with friends. And definitely in the workplace setting, I think what's been the most beautiful learning for me is there are going to be so many conflict points for us. And I think a traditional idea of leadership forced me to think that that point of conflict has to be the point at which we stop and we just take a decision because things have to move ahead. Now, for me, those points of conflicts are generative points. They are points through which new things can emerge, new ideas can emerge. And even if we have to take a decision in the interest of time in that moment, they become ongoing conversations and tensions we can hold together to be able to create something new and beautiful. I think the ability to sit with that discomfort, the not knowing, and the trust with my team or with the people I work with, to know that we'll figure something out. I think that's been a beautiful learning for me from feminist leadership. A deep understanding for me of feminist leadership is that it's inherently about power, and it is about building new power, about creating new systems of sharing power, and sometimes also taking power, right? So when I think of anyone who wants to practice feminist leadership in any position, I think step one for me is always to internalize what that means for you, and internalize how power has showed up in your life. And how would you interrogate that, and how would you undo your understanding of power? I think second for me is a lot of traditional leadership ideals get very internalized, especially for fem leaders, for trans folks, for non-binary folks. And how do you challenge your own pushback against that traditional idea of leadership, and really internalize the need to decentralize power, to think of new systems of being? So I think anyone who's taking up feminist leadership in any position, you have to get comfortable with knowing that this is going to lead to shifts in dynamics. It's going to lead to shifts in power. And you're probably going to lose some of the privileges you've held over time, because renegotiating power means that we start looking at each other with respect because of who we are, and not because of the position or inherent power we hold because of these positions. So I think that's really important for me. If you are someone who's just starting out with feminist leadership and wants to try and see how that could change your life or your leadership style, I would also recommend that you start with micro experiments. It's something that really helped me, which was to set a small goal for myself for something that I would do in a certain way, and reimagine how I would do it now that I was applying my intersectional feminist values to that leadership process or outcome. And then to see what the roadblocks were for me, what worked, what didn't work, and where I even might need support. And to be able to do those micro experiments really helped me learn more about myself. It helped me build a community that could support me to practice feminist leadership. And it also helped me do it in a way that continued to sustain my accountability and interest towards it, because it didn't feel like a challenge or something that I couldn't overcome, because it was broken down so much for me. Yeah. If you're listening in, I would love for you to give this a shot, to try a micro experiment in your life, and maybe reach out to us through comments or otherwise to tell us how that worked out for you, what your challenges were, and maybe we can come together to think of a new way of doing this. Thanks for following along. I lead One Future Collective, and it would be really great if you could check it out, tell us what you think, and leave your feedback and love for us. Thank you.